This is A Story of Sorts, the podcast mostly about bookish stuff. Hello everyone, Karina here. On this episode, I chat with Jadie Jang about her debut urban fantasy novel, Monkey Around. Have a listen. Jadie, welcome to A Story of Sorts.
Thank you so much.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm a writer, shockingly enough. I live in San Francisco and write primarily about San Francisco. and I've worked for a very long time as a nonprofit administrator, cultural worker, and activist in the Bay Area.
Monkey Around is your debut urban fantasy novel. Can you reveal a bit of it to us?
Sure. So Monkey Around is what's known as a paranormal detective story. And our quote unquote detective is Maya McQueen, who is a young woman a few years out of college who works as a barista at the local supernatural sanctuary / cafe. And she also does side gigs for her boss, who is a magic user. And she herself is a shapeshifter, an unlimited shapeshifter, but she tends to fall into the shape of a monkey as a default. And she is an orphan who doesn't know her origins and doesn't know anything except that she turns into an Asian monkey and looks somewhat Asian in her human form. She is also an activist. This all keeps her very busy, and she's running around the Bay Area when she starts finding the bodies of shapeshifters who have had their souls sucked out. While she's doing all of these things and doing her many jobs, she has to try to figure out who is killing shapeshifters and also help her biggest crush convince his little sister to leave the gang that she's just joined. So it's kind of complicated. It's a little bit complicated, the plot, but there's a lot of action and a lot of non-Western supernatural creatures because the Bay Area is full of people from non-Western cultures, immigrant communities, and so forth. And I wanted to reflect those in the book.
I think the main character is just super fun, to be honest. She is just so relatable. Because in some ways she is kind of so lost, but she is also so cool. Yeah, I think she's really relatable. How did the idea to write Monkey Around present itself to you?
I had been binging actually a lot of urban fantasy series, and I love urban fantasy, but urban fantasy in the States is overwhelmed by European mythologies and European supernatural creatures, particularly vampires and werewolves, and fae. Fae are British Isles, werewolf is Western European, and vampires are Central European. But it's all European, and it's gotten a little bit, witches, demons sometimes, but it's gotten a little bit repetitive. And there's this whole world full of mythologies that, particularly the ones that I grew up with and the ones that the people I know in the Bay Area grew up with, that just aren't being used in urban fantasy. And I thought, if there really were supernatural creatures in the world, and if there really were supernatural creatures in the Bay Area, they wouldn't be primarily vampires and werewolves. They would be creatures from all over the world who followed their own population of humans into immigrant enclaves. And you would have immigrant supernatural creatures as well. And since the Bay Area is one of the most diverse regions in the world, and Port of Oakland is one of the top 5 busiest ports in the country, the creatures would be coming through Oakland like crazy. So I thought that that was one impulse, was to reflect that and give urban fantasy a bit of a boost from a whole new quarter. And another impulse was to reflect my own personal community, which I rarely see in fiction. And when I see it in fiction, it's generally almost always by a writer I know personally because our community is very small. but the Asian American literary arts community is it's very big in the Bay Area, but it's a tight knit community, and I really wanted to see it reflected in just a really fun genre novel for a change.
Yeah.
Instead of always in memoir or auto fiction, and then a third impulse for this was to reflect the activist community and to normalize it, because at the time that I first started writing this, it was the second term, Obama's second term, and the left was really kind of falling apart, and activism, had kind of like was kind of on the one hand was kind of flagging after Obama's election, and on the other hand, had been given this whole new lease on life by the Occupy movement, and then all of the movements that followed, the Black Lives Matter movement, and Dakota Access Pipeline protests, and so on and so forth, and just something new every year. And I thought, this is the world that I live in, the world of activism, the world of social justice. This is the world I work in and have for decades. And you also rarely see this in fiction, much less in fun genre fiction.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to put all of this stuff into just like a really fun, action-packed genre book. And that's how I came up with the idea of Monkey Around. I mean, it's a lot, but that's that's where it came from.
It didn't come all at once either. So
no, it didn't.
Bits and pieces. So you want to talk about the work that you do?
Sure. So I moved to the Bay Area in the late 90s, and I came here specifically to work with Asian American communities.
Mm-hmm.
I had, like many, I'm mixed race, I'm Chinese and white. And like many Asian Americans of my generation, I grew up in cities that were not very heavily populated with Asians. I grew up in suburbs. I grew up surrounded by white people, and very disconnected from my roots.
Mm-hmm.
And I moved to the Bay Area to find an Asian American community and to find multiracial communities that where I could feel, that I could disappear into, where I could feel at home and not constantly feel like I was sticking out like a sore thumb.
Yeah.
And when you look at the people who are active in social justice activist communities, particularly Asian American activist communities, about half of them grew up in Asian American communities, and about half of them grew up outside of Asian American communities and felt that they stuck out like a sore thumb. And I'm one of those people. So I moved to the Bay Area, and I immediately got involved in cultural institutions, arts and media organizations that were organized and run by Asian Americans for Asian Americans, to give Asian Americans a voice. And of course, in the late 90s, there were very, very few Asian American artists and makers who had any voice in mainstream media, any voice in media at all. And so promoting the voices of Asian American artists and media makers was really, really important. And so that's where I started out, and I got involved in more and more organizations. At one point in the early 2000s, I got together with a group of journalists and activists, and we co-founded Hyphen Magazine, which is an Asian American, a national Asian American news and culture magazine, which we called Stealth Progressive. It was supposed to be fun and glossy and candy colored, but underneath all of that have a very progressive message, which is also something that fed into my desire to write Monkey Around, to have it be a stealth progressive organ, so to speak. And then later on, I got involved in other work in other areas, some anti-war protesting later on. And I worked for a while in micro entrepreneurship with low-income communities. And then later, when I became disabled myself, I got involved and I'm still currently involved in disability justice. Yeah, there's a lot of streams in the larger flow of social justice work, and I've been involved in more than one of them.
Wow, that's really good. Is that one of the reasons that you decided to write about the Monkey King myth?
Well, the Monkey King was my favorite as a kid, and that's not a surprise. Monkey King is a lot of kids' favorite. Monkey King is probably the best known mythological legendary figure in the East Asian cultural sphere, and there are just a bajillion adaptations of the novel, the Monkey King novel called Journey to the West, which I mention in Monkey Around. It's a 16th century Chinese novel that sort of codified the story of the Monkey King. And there have been like a bajillion adaptations of Journey to the West in Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, I think, as well as more recently in Australia and the United States. There's just been so many adaptations in film and TV and manga and yada, yada, yada. And in the States, even though, I don't know if you've seen Into the Badlands.
No, I haven't, no.
The television show, very, very loose adaptation of Journey to the West. Even though we had Into the Badlands, Journey to the West is almost completely unknown in the United States, and the Monkey King is almost completely unknown in the United States. Although in the last decade or so, because there's been so much interest in East Asian pop culture, he's become better known. The characters become better known. But, you walk down the street, even in San Francisco, you walk down the street and grab a person and say, you know who the Monkey King is? Chances are, like 50-50, they'll never have heard of him ever. Okay. So, but I love the Monkey King, and I love a number of things about the Monkey King. And so when I thought, like, what kind of supernatural creature is my main character going to be, that was just the first thing that popped into my mind. She's got to be a female Monkey King, And the moment you gender bend something, it just gets so interesting.
It's curious because I remember reading the blurb for the book and then thinking, oh, it's the same myth as Dragon Ball. Because I don't know if in the United States it's very known, but in Portugal, I'm Portuguese, it's super known. Like everyone my generation, I'm 34, saw Dragon Ball. Like we went from school home to watch Dragon Ball. And it's just so funny the way that they created, they picked up a myth and you watch the series and you have no idea about that part of Chinese culture, obviously. For you, it's just Dragon Ball. And then later on you pick it up, it's like, oh, this is based on a myth and it's based on a manga. And that was definitely for me. So when I saw that, when I read the blurb, my mind went like, wow, this just brings me so many memories from my childhood, because it was really, I think it was really one of the most famous series in Portugal.
Yeah. And it was quite popular in the States as well, among a certain group of people. But again, they I don't think most of them were aware of the background or history.
No, I wasn't, for sure. I just thought the series was super funny, because they always write, especially with basically, of course, we listened to it in Portuguese, so it wasn't even subtitles because it's for kids, at least the first season. And they made it super funny as well, and the characters are super interesting. So yeah, it was kind of funny now to see the same myth, and that meant so much, even though I didn't know it was a myth from my childhood in an urban fantasy novel. Why did you choose San Francisco as the background to this story?
Like I said, the impetus to writing the story was to represent my community, my experience, and so of course it had to be San Francisco. It's that simple. I have other ideas in the back burner for fantasies that take place in other cities and other places, but San Francisco is, of course, the place I know best, and this particular story had to be in San Francisco.
Without spoilers, do you have a favorite scene in the book?
I don't really. I wrote this from an outline. So I completed the outline and I knew what the entire book looked like before I started writing it. I promised myself when I was writing the outline that I would never write a scene that bored me.
Okay.
And that, if I, because before I started writing this book, my writing process was different. I didn't outline anything. I would just get an idea, sit down and write.
Wow.
And
yeah.
And it's a very labor intensive process, and it's very energy intensive. It's very difficult to do when you have chronic fatigue syndrome, because you have to sit there for hours and hours and hours and just dig it. And you do end up writing a lot of scenes that get you from one place to another place. Because you can kind of glimpse something through the darkness over there that's bright and shiny, but you have to get, write your way towards that. So I ended up writing a lot of, writing a lot of stuff that I did not find particularly interesting, but that got me to places. So when I said, all right, I'm going to write this from an outline, I'm going to structure this in advance, and I'm going to write it scene by scene, I promised myself I was not going to write anything that was boring, and anything that was a slog. And so basically there is connective tissue in the book. There has to be some connective tissue, but I cut down on the connective tissue as much as possible, and just meat, as much meat as possible, and as little like gristle and tendons as possible. So hopefully there aren't a lot of there aren't a lot of places where the tension or the pace flags in the book, and I really enjoyed writing most of the book. So
I've been talking with other writers, and usually we talk about also, being, do they call it like a prancer or an outliner or something like that? It's like basically
a pantser or a planner. There's a planner and a pantser. Yeah,
that's it. I forgot the words, but basically some people really write, they plan everything, and other people just sit down and write whatever comes to their mind. But I also thought, because you're talking about making an outline, and I always thought that when people talk about outline, they do that thing in which you have specific spots in the book that you know what you want to talk about, but then you have to build the bridges to cross to those places. But you did it differently. You actually planned everything more thoroughly than that.
Yeah, scene by scene. Every scene was written, the arc of every scene was written out in a paragraph. And I knew that I left out all the connective tissue, and I knew that I would have to have transitions. I knew that I would have to explain what happened in between scenes here and there. But I did that, and then I went back and cut as much of that out as possible.
Oh, yeah, I don't think I don't think I've ever heard, anyone has ever told me, I write like this in such a defined way. It's very interesting. I really love to talk to people about the way that they come up with stories, and the way that they actually plan a story, because for me, I find it, when I write, I haven't written in a long time, but I usually I plan, so I kind of know the end most of the time, and bits in the middle that are important. But then, and I think that's one reason why I don't write as much. Like, how do you get there?
Right.
Like, how do you get to these places? How do you build those bridges? And it's pretty interesting. I don't think I've ever talked with anyone who actually outlined so detailed, but it's very interesting, because it kind of helps you go to the next scene, I think.
Yeah. Well, I when I was in college, in university, I was studying creative writing, and I took a class on writing for stage and screen. And God, the difference between writing fiction in the creative writing department and writing for stage and screen in the theater department was just like night and day. Because the fiction department, that's where I learned my old process, where you get an idea, you just sit down and you dig. And it's like, there's no, there's very little discussion of planning. There's very little discussion of plotting. There's very little discussion of structure. It's all about, surface language and thematics and da da da. And then you go to the writing for stage and screen class, and it's all structure. It's all scene by scene. You write. They teach you to go out. You have to go out and buy index cards. And you have to write one scene on each index card, and then you structure it, and it's all planned out, and it's all there because it has to be highly structured because people are actually going to be performing this.
Yeah.
So it's collaborative. So it has to be structured in a way that other people can use it, because you're not just writing it and that's it. You're writing it and then handing it off to someone else who's going to use it. So I learned both right at the beginning when I was in my late teens. I learned both processes, and I never used the latter process until I started writing Monkey Around. And then it all came back to me, and it was like writing scene by scene. And writing like that is very cinematic, because you can think about it cinematically. You say, well, instead of talking between scene A and scene B, I can just jump cut, you know. And you can use jump cuts in books now. Books have become so cinematic, and genre books have become so cinematic. You can use jump cuts, and you can use a lot of kind of cinematic transitions if you want to. And I found myself doing that because in a film and in a TV show, you don't have a lot of space to like blah, 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 blah. You have to get to the meat of the story. So you just jump from one scene to the next. And it was a real interesting lesson for me to be able to do that, because all the stuff I'd written before that, was very literary in the sense that, it's not filmable. It doesn't, it's not analogous to film. It's not analogous to comic books. It's not analogous to anything else. It is fiction.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It's very interesting. Wow. I wanted to ask, what was the easiest thing about writing this book and the most challenging?
The easiest thing was,
maybe there wasn't anything easy. I mean,
no. I mean, I don't think of it as easy. I probably think of it as, the things that flowed the best. The things that flowed the best. You
can say the most fun as well.
Yeah.
Maybe
well, some of the most fun things were also the hardest.
I
actually don't think of things in terms of easy and hard. I just, I think the hardest thing was finishing it. The last couple, I had, I think, 6 full drafts, and I think the last 2 drafts were the hardest. I'm a perfectionist, so I do a lot of drafts for absolutely everything I do.
Wow.
Yeah.
You suffer, and you mentioned it before, you suffer from chronic fatigue, and that led you to consuming urban fantasy and then deciding to try your hand at writing it. Would you like to talk about that a little? Sure.
So I published a book under my own name, which is Claire Light. Jadie Jang is a pseudonym that I'm using for this, and I use the 2 different names because I use 2 different writing processes, and it seemed like they came from 2 different places. But I published a collection of short stories at the end of 2009 under Claire Light, and literally the same month that I published that book, I got sick, and I never got better. Yeah. And it took 2 years for me to get a diagnosis, but I finally got the diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome. And it took me 7 years from when I first got sick to actually get adequate treatment. My doctors were sending me out to all kinds of things, and it took me that long to actually find a doctor who could give me treatment that actually worked. So during that time, I had a lot of downtime, because one of the things that happens when you have chronic fatigue syndrome is you lose energy, and you just don't have enough energy, literally don't have enough energy to get through the day. You can't work a full day. Some people can't even get out of bed. I'm not that bad, fortunately. But you can't work a full day. You can't do anything that requires physical exertion or mental exertion. Yeah. Including writing, so and reading, and this is the worst part for a lifelong voracious reader like myself, and probably you as well. It's a really, really cruel trick that you reach a point in the day where your energy is depleted and you can't read anything challenging. So what I found was that I could, pick a genre, any genre. I could pick a genre and binge books in a genre series that were written in the, to the same formula over and over again. And I'm open to all kinds of genres, but the one that appealed to me the most at that time was urban fantasy, particularly paranormal detective stories. And I read a lot of those series. And I realized, I really, really enjoyed those because there's a lot of female-centered paranormal detectives in the urban fantasy genre. And they speak very directly to the experience of young women, young or youngish women, women mostly in their 30s, who are educated and professional and single, living in urban centers. And they speak very particularly to power dynamics of women in those situations, their power dynamics with regard to men, their power dynamics with regard to institutions, their power dynamics with regard to their gender, their age, their profession, et cetera, et cetera. And they use the vampire werewolf tropes to talk about, the alpha male, to talk, the alpha male leader of a pack kind of thing. All of those things talk about these power dynamics, and the tropes that are common in these stories. This woman is she's not the most powerful. There's always a man who's more powerful than she is, but she has a special gift that nobody else has, and that makes her valuable to everyone around her in various ways. So her weakness is offset by her value. And then of course there's also the orphan trope and the I don't know where I come from trope, which also speaks to this play between weakness and essential strength and value. So all of these things are playing out in my mind while I'm binging all of these books. And I just thought, all right, I was also trying to continue writing the way that I'd been writing, and it was becoming increasingly difficult because pantsing is so incredibly energy intensive. And if you only have an hour's worth of energy that day, you can't pants a story. If you have 3 hours of energy that day, it's hard to pants a story. And so I finally, after a few years, said, you know what, let's try this differently. Let's try to outline something. What am I going to outline? Of course, I'm going to outline urban fantasy. So yeah, that's how that happened.
And do you have any favorites that helped you during that time?
Oh yeah. So my guilty pleasure, and guilty because there are so many problematic tropes involved in this series,
okay.
But is Patricia Briggs' Mercy Thompson series. My non-guilty pleasure. My non-guilty pleasures are particular. I think probably my favorite non-guilty pleasure is Seanan McGuire's October Days series, which is also Bay Area, and but she does it differently. I made a point that every single place, every single location I use in the Bay Area actually exists, except for the Supernatural Sanctuary, which of course does not exist. But all of the other locations actually do exist. My book launch party is going to happen at the place where Maya finds the first dead body.
Oh,
yeah.
Cool.
So, and Seanan McGuire's October Days series, most of the locations are kind of twisted versions of real locations, but they aren't real locations. So, so yeah, she did it differently, and that also inspired me. Here are the things that I would like to do that you do, and here are the things I would like to do that you don't do. That kind of inspiration. And I also recommend C.E. Murphy's Walker Papers and Ilona Andrews' Kate Daniels series. Jane Yellow Rock, love that one. Just there's so many. And Kitty Vaughn's Carrie Vaughn's Kitty Norval series. Yeah.
Great. No, because then I can leave them as recommendations for people who would like to maybe get in the genre already, like the genre. Yeah. But it's also very funny that you talk about guilty pleasures and non-guilty pleasures, because I have the same feeling. For me, guilty pleasures are usually books that are in some way problematic. if people are like, oh, that's cheesy or whatever, like, I don't care. That's not a guilt. I'm not guilty of that. I don't feel guilty. But yeah, when you do talk about problematic books that, you know, the authors or the book is problematic, that's where the guilty pleasure comes in.
Yeah.
You said that you write under the name Jadie Jang. What compelled you to get a pen name, and why did you choose that?
Well, like I said before, that I felt very much like when I switched up processes and decided to write a genre to, you know, to speaking very specifically to the tropes of the genre and the general feel of the genre, I felt like it was coming from a different place. And so, you know, I immediately thought, you know, I need to put this under a different name so that my readers know that this is not, it's not coming from the same place. The stories that I published under Claire Light, I mean, I would be thrilled if people read Monkey Around and like it, and then are curious and want to go read my other stories, but just be prepared. They are very dark and they are very cold universe, and they're written completely differently. And somebody who reads Monkey Around and thinks, oh, that was fun, and that was refreshing, and that was bracing, I want to read something else by this author, is going to be very disappointed if they go to Claire Light's work, and vice versa. You know, I think somebody who reads my short stories and thinks, wow, I want to read more of this, is going to go to Monkey Around and be like, what is this crap? So so I'm not trying to keep the two identities separate in, you know, I'm not trying to keep it secret, but I am trying to keep like the two identities separate, in the sense that, you know, if you're the reader of one, you're not necessarily going to want to be the reader of another. And I want to keep both, and I want to keep Claire Light open for me to write more in that vein in the future, if and when I find the energy to do so again. So
it's a nice way to separate it. And then people know what they can count when they read under one name or the other, of course.
Yes.
Would you like to talk about your story as a writer? And maybe you want to go into your story as a reader as well, because you just mentioned that you've always read a lot.
I've known that I was going to be a writer since I was about 8 years old. I mean, really? I started really biting down on the reading when I was 8 years old. Before that, you know, I would read a bit. My parents would read to me. Teachers at school would read to me. I would read a bit on my own. But when I was about 7 and a half, 8, in probably, you know, around 3rd grade, I started picking up middle grade books on my own, and from that point on, I basically read 2 or 3 books a week until I got sick in my 40s. Just basically, you know, constantly devouring, and that was my life. And until I got sick when I was 40, I watched very little TV. Now I watch tons of TV because there are whole swaths of the day where there's nothing else I can do. But yeah, I watched very little TV, and I just read. I just devoured books. And I also tried writing my first story when I was 8. It didn't get very far, but I did write my first novel when I was 15, and the two have always gone hand in hand for me. You know, loving stories and wanting to make them, just always went hand in hand. And which is interesting, because not everything I love is something that I have to do. Sometimes I kind of feel like I have to try my hand at it, but then, you know, after trying my hand at it, I'm like, oh, that's not for me, and I can put it away and still love the thing, you know, like with music or with visual art. But with writing, with books, you know, that's been so essential to my life for so long. It's hard to dig out how that starts, you know.
Yeah, it's always been present.
Yeah.
You co-founded, as you mentioned, an Asian American magazine called Hyphen. You published a collection of short stories called Slightly Behind and to the Left. And you also have written essays. Do you have a favorite medium?
Novels, definitely. Yeah. And I have to say, you know, I finally figured this out in my 40s. as I was writing Monkey Around, I should have been writing novels from the beginning. I just said I wrote my first novel when I was 15. I wish someone had told me, I'm telling everybody now, I wish someone had told me then, if you're writing novels, if you started out writing novels, and you only read novels, keep writing novels. Don't take that 20-year detour that I took into writing short stories, because the formal education in creative writing forces fiction writers to write short stories. Oh. I don't really read short stories. I don't really enjoy short stories that much. And I should never have been writing them. I limped along in writing short stories. I managed to complete 5 or 6 short stories total in about 20 years because I don't like writing them. Oh. So yeah, no, I definitely, I'm definitely a novelist, no question.
Is it because it is a more complete story, or what pulls you to it?
Because you can sink yourself into it and stay there for an extended period of time. Short stories, I don't dislike short stories for themselves. What I dislike about short stories is you commit and then it's over like that. And it's like, if you don't commit, then you don't enjoy the experience. And once you commit to the characters, to the situation, and then boom, 5 seconds later, it's over. So yeah, that's a bummer.
What I find fun about short stories, even though I do prefer novels, is how much is out of the paper and you can imagine it yourself. But on the other hand, I've read books that are a bit too short and they are presented as novels, but there's so much left to the imagination and so much left to tell that it does leave me frustrated.
Yes.
So that has happened before, and I completely understand that. But yeah, because you go into the story, you start getting interested of these characters, and then it's over before you know enough.
Yeah, and there are any number of short stories that I absolutely love because they are perfect as short stories. But then there are a number of other short stories that I would love if they were novels, if they were novellas, because they drag me in and they don't give me enough, So
yeah, of course, it's kind of frustrating. It's like, no, I want more, and there isn't more.
Yeah.
Is there going to be a book tour, online or otherwise?
I believe there's going to be a blog tour. My publicist told me there was going to be a blog tour, but no, there is not going to be a book tour. I think as a first-time novelist in the middle of a pandemic, that was just never going to be, never going to happen.
That's true. Like, I started interviewing people this year only. So a lot of the times I'm just asking, what is it like to put a book out during the pandemic? And I stopped asking because I was always asking this. But especially debut novels, it must be so difficult to miss the opportunity to go on tour and to talk to readers and, to go to bookstores. But obviously things are going to take longer to get better than I think people were expecting.
Yeah. I'm actually strongly considering my book launch party, which is on Thursday, was supposed to be hybrid in person and also streamed online. And I'm strongly considering just talking to the organizers tomorrow and just saying, let's make it completely online. Because I don't know if I even want to encourage anybody to come out right now.
Yeah, I totally understand. Yeah, for your own security, but also other people's, and to kind of go against the current of people who are now kind of acting as if the pandemic is over.
Yeah, and Worldcon, I'm going, I'm going to Worldcon. It was supposed to be in August.
Yeah.
And which is, I'm releasing my book in August. Perfect. And then they pushed it back to December, and I've just been flip-flopping, like, do I want to go to DC or do I want to do, because it's also going to be hybrid. So I could stay at home and go to Worldcon, or I could go to DC and go to Worldcon. And it's like, it's like those kinds of choices which you would never have to make in an ordinary year. But on the other hand, what's really great about it is you would never have to make them because there's no option to do this online.
Yeah.
And disabled people have been, feasted, absolutely feasted with cultural events that are all online, that have all been online for the past 18 months. And that's amazing. And I don't want that to stop. So
no, exactly. Like I host 2 book clubs, and the bookstore I work at, for them, I host it for them. But they also have other poetry meetings. And a few weeks ago we started, because regulations kind of changed, and we started offering the possibility of it being in person. But we also continue to offer the online. And even I think for anyone that is like, far away from the places where the things are happening, or maybe don't have the possibility to pay for a whole ticket, because usually online the tickets are also cheaper because it's online. I think it just opens so many possibilities for everyone, disabled people, but in general everyone. And I
people
so
who
hope
can't afford to travel.
I so hope it continues, even though of course the reason why this is the way it is, it's not the reason it should be. It shouldn't be necessary for a pandemic to happen for accommodations to be made to people. But I do hope it kind of changes people's minds in that sense. So okay, so no book tour for now.
No book tour.
But maybe next year if things
maybe
get
in the
better.
future.
And are you working on something at the moment?
So I'm in draft 2 of Monkey 2. I'm calling it, the working title is Monkey 2 Primate Boogaloo, but that's a joke on
that's very funny though.
it's there's a film series, a short film series called Breaking. Was it called Breaking? It was during the breakdancing craze in the 80s. And there was a movie called Breaking, and then they did Breaking 2 Electric Boogaloo.
Wow.
And so people make fun of that a lot. So that's my thing. Anyway, but Monkey 2, I'm keep trying to write draft 2, and I keep getting stalled by release stuff. So after this coming week is like a big thing, and then after this coming week I could probably settle down a little bit and get back to Monkey 2.
Is it gonna be a series? Are there going to be 2 or 3 books, or?
I'm hoping it will be a series. I'm hoping it'll be a bit longer. It could be, I don't think I could finish the story in 3 books, but I could get it done in 4, 5 or more.
Okay.
It depends on, because I only have a 1 book deal. So it depends on the publisher. It depends on the audience. We'll see. If you guys like it, buy the book and tell all your friends.
Review it.
Review it. Yeah.
That also helps, especially in pre-orders and reviews before it's out.
Yeah.
Where can people find you online?
clairelight.org. CLAIRELIGHT.org. I also have .net, but I think I'm using .org primarily right now. And I'm on Twitter.
In the show's notes. Sorry. Just want to make sure that people know that I will leave it on the show notes so they can check it there.
Great. I'm also on Twitter under SEELIGHT, and on Insta SEELIGHT44.
So Sea Light, right? Was it
Sea Light? Yes, yeah, Sea Light.
Now, this is the last question of the podcast always, and I would like you to recommend an all-time favorite book and a book you would just recommend right now.
Okay. All-time favorite book. Whenever I think of all-time favorite books, the one that always pops into my head is García Márquez's 100 Years of Solitude, which is a stone cold classic for a reason. It's an absolutely beautiful book, full of strangeness and familiarity. The language surface is gorgeous, but there's incredible depths, and it has a structure that you cannot see until you finish the book. And it's surprising and delightful in so many ways, and I cannot recommend it enough. And the one thing that everybody says about it, which drives me nuts, is you get so confused because everybody has the same name in the book. I never had a problem. I never had a problem with keeping people, keep telling apart the different characters with the same name. So don't worry about that. Just read the book. It's a beautiful, beautiful book.
Yeah, I've read Márquez before, but I've read the A Love in Time of Cholera, and I've read one that I don't know the name because I read it in Portuguese, but it's something like a death announced. So I've never heard of. I've
Chronicle
never read
of a Death Foretold.
Yeah. Yes, thank you so much. That's exactly that. But a lot of people talk about 100 Years of Solitude. And I do kind of wonder, because I do have some trouble. In English, a lot of authors use last names rather than first names. And in general, I think, but in the Netherlands as well, like people usually use last names. In Portugal, people mostly use first names. So if I'm referring to someone, it's usually by the first name. And when I write about characters, is the first name. So I do have some trouble sometimes when it's like, there's two Mr. with the same name because they're father and son. So, but I do still want to read 100 Years of Solitude, and let's see how that is going to go. Yeah. And a recommendation that you, for right now?
The one that I am like waiting for with bated breath is the third and final book in the Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee. And I've been talking about this book all over the place, these books all over the place, but this is a wonderful fantasy series, a trilogy called the Greenbone Saga. It's Jade City, Jade War, and Jade Legacy is coming out this fall. And it takes place, it's actually an urban fantasy, although it takes place in the secondary world. The secondary world is so close to our own that it might as well just be urban fantasy. And it's about this former Asian colony that has magical jade that gives you superpowers. And only the indigenous people of this colony can actually wear the jade and use the superpowers without going completely nuts. Wow. And so they learn martial arts, and they get to do basically Hong Kong wire fu martial arts, and they're in gangs, and the gangs fight each other over control of the city and over control of the jade, and it's just this amazing. It's like Hong Kong wuxia movies meets The Godfather. It's an amazing series, and I highly recommend it to everybody.
Okay, I will leave it in the show's notes as well. Jadie, thank you so much for coming to A Story of Sorts.
Thank you so much for having. Whoops. Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome.
I always do that at least once per session of using these things. I always because I'm always waving my hands around.
Take them off.
Well, we'll try that again. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. You can access today's show's notes via my pod page, which you can find along with all of my social media links at linktree/Karine Pereira. In there, you'll also find a link to a Story of Sorts playlist available on Libro FM, containing the audiobooks recommended by our guests, which will be updated as the show progresses. If you'd like to give Libro FM a try, you can use the code A Story of Sorts at checkout to get 2 books for the price of 1. This offer is valid for new Libro FM members in the US and Canada. Libro FM is an audiobook platform which allows you to buy audiobooks directly from an indie bookstore. Check them out. If you have enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting A Story of Sorts on Patreon. Patreon is a platform which allows you to contribute monthly to the podcast in exchange for extra content, such as early access to episodes, a shout-out at the end of an episode and on Instagram, and choosing a theme for me to talk about on the podcast. You can become a patron at patreon.com/A Story of Sorts. I'd also be very grateful if you would simply leave a review and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. As usual, I'll be back in 2 weeks with a new interview. I'll talk to you then. And thank you for listening.